Climate change is scary stuff. It seems every week there's a new report or study from a different group basically saying the same thing.
Running out of time, capiche?
Politicians argue about how to reduce our emissions, but economists mostly agree. The best, cheapest way to reduce carbon emissions is to put a price on them.
Well, if you care about the economy, then carbon pricing is absolutely the best way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Carbon pricing is used in more than 50 places around the world, including Canada. Almost half of Canada's emissions come from burning fuel for electricity and heat, while about a third are from transportation. Each year, Canadians produce over 720 megatons of greenhouse gases. That's enough to fill 120,000 freight trains. A carbon tax is designed to hit the emergency brake on those emissions.
It tilts the balance, the incentives towards being efficient and using renewable energy.
A carbon tax works sort of like a road toll. If you've got too many cars driving down a single street, the traffic is unsustainable. So, to get some of those vehicles to change course, you introduce a toll charge. The result? Some of those drivers will find a new route or come up with a different mode of transportation.
It's really up to people to choose what they want to do, and that's the beauty of carbon pricing, is the inherent flexibility of the policy.
A carbon tax typically increases the price of gasoline, diesel, and coal slowly over time so that people can adjust. The money raised can then be used to invest in green technologies or for tax breaks. In Canada, the vast majority of the population actually stands to make money from the carbon tax through government rebates.
Do incentives work? Do people respond to price changes? Unequivocally, yes. And so then the issue becomes, how large is the change and how large is the carbon price that incentivizes that change?
Sweden is home to the world's most expensive and oldest carbon tax, introduced back in 1991. Carbon emissions there have decreased by 25%. The UK introduced a carbon tax on electricity in 2013. That saw the country's reliance on coal power drop from around 40 to less than 1%. And another international leader is the Canadian province of British Columbia. Since it introduced a carbon tax in 2008, emissions have dropped between 5 and 15%.
And at the same time, BC's got some of the strongest growth in Canada. That's not because of the carbon tax, but it does show that the carbon tax hasn't hindered BC's ability to prosper economically.
But despite its successes, carbon pricing has proved a tough sell. Opinion polls suggest Canadians are divided. The federal Conservatives are opposed, and several provinces are even challenging the tax in court.
Part of the reason that a carbon tax is proving so unpopular is that the added cost is plain to see. It's right there on your gas or heating bill. Other systems, such as the Ontario government's plan to target heavy emitters, aren't only less effective, but economists say they'll actually cost taxpayers more. But those costs are hidden.
Though it's carbon pricing in disguise, so to speak. They're roughly emulating a system in Australia. Unfortunately, it didn't work very well, and it tends to cost a lot for the reasons we've talked about already. You end up paying people to do things they might have done anyway, even without that payment.
Projections suggest that a carbon tax would result in slightly slower economic growth, and its opponents argue that carbon pricing simply isn't worth that sacrifice, because Canada represents only a sliver, around 1.5% of global emissions. But on a per-person basis, Canadians produce more greenhouse gas emissions than any other G20 country.
We combust fossil fuels in heating our homes, in driving, and so we are contributing to the problem. And so it's incumbent on us to help with the solution.
But even Canada's current price on carbon falls far short and will need to be 5 times higher if the country is to reach its emissions targets set under the Paris Climate Accord. Those targets are meant to keep global warming below 2 degrees centigrade, which climate scientists warn is the point where things go from bad to downright terrifying.